Hidden in the woods behind the headquarters of Odiorne State Park in Rye, New Hampshire, lies the oldest European burial ground in the state, the old Odiorne Point Cemetery. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cemetery Histories and Old Cemeteries of New England. In 1623, Scotsman David Thompson landed here on what is now known as Odiorne Point with a number of fishermen and other tradesmen to establish a profitable fishing and trading outpost. The natives called this place Panaway, which means the place where the water spreads out, referring to the marshes near the mouths of the Piscataqua River and Sagamore Creek. Thompson adopted this term and called his colony Panaway Plantation. With the first settlement inevitably comes the first burial ground. Not ready for the harsh New England winters, many of Thompson's company did not survive the first year, and many of them are undoubtedly buried here. Panaway Plantation was abandoned after only a few years, and the inhabitants all moved to Strawberry Bank, which is now called Portsmouth, or Great Island, which is now called Newcastle. After Panaway Plantation was abandoned, the cemetery was disused until the land became inhabited again by John Odiorne in 1660. His descendants lived here until the United States government took the land to build Fort Dearborn during World War II, and they used the cemetery until 1865. The cemetery is clearly divided into two separate areas. A number of unmarked headstones are in a group on the east side of the cemetery, close to the entrance gate, and the Odiorne family graves are all confined to the northwest corner. The group near the gate are undoubtedly original settlers of Panaway Plantation who predated the Odiornes by many decades. I counted 42 stones all laid out in pairs of headstones and footstones, so at least 21 people are buried in this area. In this corner, most of these stones belong to the family of Ebenezer Lewis Odiorne, the sixth generation owner of the farm. The first three generations of Odiornes who lived here have no burial records and no stones marked here, so it's unknown if they are buried here or not. Benjamin Odiorne and his wife, Mary Beck, inherited the farm from Benjamin's father, John Odiorne III, after he and all three of Benjamin's brothers were killed during the Revolutionary War. Benjamin and Mary are the first Odiornes we can safely assume are buried here, as the oldest marked stone here belongs to their granddaughter, Abigail, who died in 1805, and Benjamin died just a year earlier, and Mary died in 1822. There are 7 unmarked graves in this corner, and Abigail's stone is the second one from the stone wall, so I would bet that the closest grave to the wall belongs to Benjamin. It is entirely possible that some of these stones belong to older generations, but there's no evidence to support that, unfortunately. The next generation is Benjamin's son, Ebenezer Odiorne, and his wife Mary Seavey, who built this house in 1800, just a few hundred feet from the cemetery, and they are both buried here with carved marble headstones. Their son, Ebenezer Lewis Odiorne, inherited the farm upon Ebenezer's death in 1826, and most of the rest of the stones here belong to his family. 3 of Ebenezer's siblings, Abigail, who I mentioned earlier, Mary, and John, are also buried here. Ebenezer Lewis and his wife Mary Brown had 9 children, and 5 of them are buried here as well. Their 2 oldest children, Jonathan and Mary, survived to adulthood but both fell ill with consumption and died at the ages of 33 and 29. Their 3rd child, Moses, went west and lived and died in Wyoming. Levi, their 4th child, died at the age of 6 from unknown causes. Next, Ebenezer James also died from consumption at the age of 30. Charles was a miller who lived to the age of 79 and is buried in Portsmouth. Charles inherited the farm upon his father's death in 1865. Their next child died as an infant and is buried here. Their 8th child, Clara, got married and had 2 children, but she also died at the young age of 34. She is buried in another cemetery in Rye. And finally, Cynthia grew up and got married and had 4 children and lived to the age of 82 and is buried in the same cemetery as her sister Clara. Charles's son, Ralph Edwin Odiorne, was the last of the family to live here and was the owner when the land was taken by the government to build Fort Dearborn during World War II. Ralph's wife Winifred ran a seasonal tavern and boarding house at the family homestead during Prohibition. It's also possible that they were involved in local rum-running operations, which were prevalent on the New Hampshire seacoast. Unfortunately, any evidence of Panaway Plantation, with the exception of this cemetery, was destroyed by either the Odiornes' use of the land as a farm or by the construction of Fort Dearborn. Luckily, the government spared the Odiorne house, and it is used as the park headquarters today. Aside from the house and the cemetery, the remnants of the Odiorne farm can be easily traced by following the stone walls that were left behind. A short walk around the cemetery gives a pretty clear picture of where the fields were on the farm, and where the forest remained undisturbed. This area here is just on the other side of the stone wall from the cemetery to the west, and it's pretty obvious that this is one of their fields. As it is bounded entirely by stone walls, the earth has clearly been flattened, and none of these trees appear to be much more than 100 years old. The stone walls extend all the way from the road to the back of the marsh, a distance of over 1,000 feet, and completely surround the area that used to be the farm. Well off the beaten path, away from the rest of the park's attractions like the Science Center or the World War II bunkers and gun emplacements, The cemetery occupies a quiet corner with just a footpath to the marsh along one of its stone walls. A rather unassuming location for New Hampshire's oldest piece of European history. Some of these field stones were placed over 400 years ago, and it's entirely possible that these stone walls here could be the oldest stone walls in the state. If you have any interest, this cemetery is well worth a visit. Thanks for joining me, and if you enjoyed the video, give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next cemetery.